Really
All
pull up the
right.
slides.
Perfect. Thank you. And I appreciate everybody being here, even though it's summer, and I'm sure there's lots of summer activities on your mind, if not the World Cup, which is also very exciting. So glad so many of you are here to talk about recovery and recovery community centers and science. So, as you know, we have closed captions available via Zoom. So, here are some instructions for if you do want to have them. This is how you would get them. And I know the slide is zooming by fast. So, simply put it into the chat if you want help with it, and we will help. Next slide. Upcoming seminars, we are now on our bi-monthly schedule rather than monthly that we have been on before. So the next seminar is actually in October, and the reason why we are not meeting in September is because it'll be recovery month, and there'll be so many activities going on that I'm sure many people will be pulled in many different directions. So we will regroup after recovery month in October and then again in December. And we have sort of themed presentations where we're looking at different age segments. We're going to be talking about older adults at RCCs in October and younger people in December. Really looking forward to those discussions, and we have registration links here for you to put on your calendar. Next slide. A reminder, so we are in our second no-cost extension year for our NIDA-funded project. These are the wonderful people who are the brains behind the operations and who guide our activities, which at this point is really the seminar series. Our other processes, the pilot funding and so forth, are already done, but our seminar series is going strong. And it's particularly exciting that one of our steering committee members, Amy, is also a presenter today. So that'll be very exciting. Next slide. A reminder that our project, which focuses on advancing the science on recovery community centers, is part of the Consortium on Addiction Recovery Science. And in fact, our project here was part of founding this project. And this consortium really is a group of scientists initially, but now everybody, hopefully, that comes together to advance the science on addiction recovery science. And we always include this slide here about current things that are going on within the consortium in terms of work groups and seminars, showcases, how to become a member project, and so forth. So this will be online and probably early next week when we have all the slides and audio recording ready. So you don't have to read through it all right now, but you will be able to read through it. And then I don't know if it's included in the links that Joe kindly is putting into here right now, but we should have also included the actual link for course in here, which we do at the bottom of a slide, but if you can also, perfect, put it on here. So you can go to the course website directly to read more about course. Next slide. Very importantly, course organizes an online conference every year. This year, it's going to be held September 23rd and 24th, and it's a jam-packed agenda. I don't know, Amy, if you want to add anything here. Importantly, we put the link here for registering for the event, so you can come. Amy, do we have a program developed yet, or do people need to stay tuned?
We do have a program developed. We have two keynote panels. I just want to say that NCARS is the biggest that it's ever been, or will be the biggest that it's ever been. We just had a really amazing set of applications to present at NCARS, posters, roundtables, symposiums. It's a really great group. And we even had to expand one of the days to include an additional track because we had so many great applications for presentations. So if you haven't registered yet, please do because early bird registration will end November 24th. There's still time to get the early bird rates.
When you said November, you mean July? July 23rd?
Yes, I meant July. Yes. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Yes, it's a wonderful opportunity. And it's also online and it's lively. Uh, greatly looking forward to seeing you all there. Next slide. And I will say that several of the people here that are going to be presenters there. So more times for us to discuss all the pieces of thoughts that we currently have. The other thing I want to highlight is our list of RCC. As you all know, we did a nationwide survey a couple of years ago, which I think shockingly, I just did them quote unquote math. It's 5 to 6 years ago that we did this. So it's definitely been a while, and we try to keep our list updated as there's certainly more RCCs that are opening and also certainly RCCs we hadn't heard about before. You guys can help us. Any RCC you know, we want to check our list to see if they're on there, or just tell us about RCCs in your state, in your community. We'd be very grateful. The reason we maintain the list is so that we can have it publicly available on our website, and any person who wants to find an RCC near them can go and find it. It's organized by state, so you can look at the addresses within your state to look to find them. So this is for researchers finding partners, for people looking for recovery support, to find out what's going on in the community, for clinicians who have heard about RCCs and are curious and want to check them out. They go there and can find those RCCs. So we greatly appreciate you all telling us about RCCs you know of. And that brings us to our live feature. Do we have Joe here yet?
I haven't seen him, no. So I can.
All right. So unfortunately, Joe is not able to join us at this moment, but we do want you all to get an impression of the Association of Persons Affected by Addiction. And it so happens that we have a video that is similar to a live feature that we will be sharing with you instead. This video is specifically for a study we are currently doing, where we're connecting study participants to their local RCCs. So pardon the language specific to the study, but you will still get a great impression of APA. Cora, if you could screen share with sound.
All right. Yes. So bear with me just 1 second while I pull this up for us here. But yeah, sharing sound always important. Okay.
And the reason we do this is we always want to be grounded in what RCCs are. So that's why we didn't want to skip it. And instead, we'll show you a 6-minute video. Right. Apologize for that.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
All right, here we go. And let me know if the sound doesn't come through, but fingers crossed it should.
We are excited that you are participating in the study, and we welcome you to APA Recovery Community Center. You are using medications for opioid use disorder, and please know that at APA Recovery Community Center, we have a welcoming space for anyone that uses medications for opioid use disorder. We honor all paths of recovery, and medications for opioid use disorder is a path of recovery.
My name is Joe Powell, and I am still a person in long-term recovery. And just to give you a little overview about what does the Association of Persons Affected by Addiction do? What we do is we provide recovery support services. And what that means is that all of our services fall under 4 supports, and now 5 supports. And they provide information support. That means any information that a person wants in the community to how do they get into recovery, where's treatment located at, right? And where is other culturally congruent supports and services are in the community. That information we are available. Jobs and housings comes under instrumental supports. What instrumental supports are there that a person has to have to really sustain recovery? And that means jobs and housing and health and wellness, right? These things a person has to have to really to move toward recovery. And then we have affiliation support. Affiliation support is the same as companionship, and what we do is we do a dance once a month called Jamming in Recovery, where just last week we brought 100 people together here, learning how to have fun, clean and sober fun, learning how to have fun and learn how to socialize again.
So have family potluck, and that's where we have meals, and we bring the peers together with the coaches.
Right? And then we have what we call emotional support. Emotional support is big because we provide training for recovery coaches. And recovery coaches is a certified peer support specialist or certified peer specialist that have been trained by us that actually is a credential that the state of Texas offers. The 5th support is education support, and that means that APA has collaborated with UNT, the University of North Texas, along with Eastville College, and also some of the other collegiate recovery programs in the community. All of this is around recovery, right? So our job is not to spread addiction, but to spread recovery, to spread the solution, right? And that's what we do. Wherever people are, our job is to spread recovery. So we say recovery is contagious, give it to somebody. Let's spread recovery.
Hello, my name is Donald Clemens. I'm one of the program managers here at APA, the Association of Persons Affected by Addiction. Just coming to you today to let you know a little bit about what we do at the Recovery Community Center here at APA. We have different programs, different activities going on, and all of them are designed to encourage individuals to participate in long-term recovery. The thing we do is we provide peer support, and peer support is where we support the peer in engaging in long-term recovery. And all of our coaches here have lived experience in substance use and mental health challenges, and the whole goal, as I said, is to get the peer to connect with long-term recovery.
We are people with lived experience, and we're not there to judge you, but we're there to support you as you figure out what's next for you. What that looks like is we also offer groups.
Groups like Healthy Living, Spiritual Development. We also have veterans group, and those groups, all these groups are designed to support individuals in long-term recovery.
It's all about you and what you're trying to do as a person, rather than have someone else tell you what to do.
A piece, what we call affiliation piece, where we come together and just have a good time and socialize with one another.
Helping me towards paying back forward what I helped destroy, prior to my incarceration.
My name is Cody, and I am a person in long-term recovery. And one of the things that I've been asked is how has APA affected my recovery? All right. And it started a while back. I was actually incarcerated in Dallas County Jail, and APA used to have a recovery pod that was inside the jail. That was the first time that I got an opportunity to hear that recovery was even possible.
APA has left a big impact on my life by indulging in positive groups. Really thank APA for that. It's a blessing.
Hi, my name is Ray Gale, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. What that means is that I'm responsible for my choices and my decisions and the consequences that come with that. Today, I'm able to support my family. I'm a loving sister, aunt, and mother. I participate in my recovery by attending 12-step meetings. I work at APA, and I've been here, became a part of me supporting other women that are in recovery. It's like giving back in sort of a way. I made up in my mind a long time ago that I would support other people that were trying to get clean. My clean date is 4/14/93. I've been clean for 33 years. I know y'all say that's a long time, but it's only by the grace of God, whom I call, that's my higher power, that has sustained me all these years. I've been through the ups and downs of life, but I choose to go through them clean. So I'm real grateful today for my life.
When you come, it's totally up to you if you want to let us know that you are part of this study.
We are excited that you are participating.
I figured that's all just study-specific information, so there we go.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I love that recovery is contagious. Give it to somebody. It's wonderful. All right. With that, I'm going to transition us. I think you have the slides. I'll wait for you, Cora.
Thank you. All right, here we go. Bring them back up. And oh, is it gonna? There we go.
Perfect. Excellent. And then if you move us to the next one. So next is going to be our polling questions. This is where you get to do the work. Our questions, as always, are demographics to see who we all have here. We hope to bring together groups from different perspectives so we can all learn from each other. And we have some questions for foreshadowing the content to come. So go ahead, Cora, and open the poll for us.
All right.
We're going to keep the poll open until we have about 75% to 80% participation. So please go ahead and answer so we can move on to our presentation when we get there. Oh, are we experiencing technical difficulties?
Well, just because my screen sharing was blocking the button, so I just wanted to had to remove that for a second, but the question should be on the screen for folks now.
Beautiful. So you have a little gray bar on the right-hand side to scroll down. Just answer the questions as you go. And then when you get to the bottom, the gray submit button becomes blue. And then we will see that you've answered. And once we have 80% participation, we will close this poll. Kathryn, if you want to scroll up and see if there was any answer that maybe you skipped, then maybe that's why it didn't turn blue. How are we looking, Cora?
We're getting up there. We just hit 79%.
Ooh, 1% more, folks. So one more lucky survey. If you want us to wait for you as you're completing, let us know that too.
Oh, and we just bumped up to 81.
All right. Hearing no holds, let's go ahead and close the poll and take a look at the answers together.
All right.
All right, so I'm going to jump right to our first evidence-based questions, where we had two questions. We were going to be asking you guys what you think about the evidence base for recovery homes versus recovery community centers. And for recovery homes, 77% of us believe that yes, science has clearly documented that recovery homes support recovery. And then the next question for recovery community centers, 71%, nearly as many, thought that recovery community centers are also clearly documented in the scientific literature as showing that RCCs support recovery. We'll hear more about those things from our wonderful presenters in a moment. Then we'll also ask, in what ways would recovery home residents benefit from being connected to their local RCC? And we have a lot of, 72% was the lowest for RCCs provide support regarding employment activities, and the highest was for additional support services like coaching and help with social services and engaging in activities. And then for what barriers exist, I think the most commonly endorsed barrier was transportation issues, 71%. Most of us thought that the other barriers, they also exist, but that one, if we can solve transportation, we are going a long way in helping making those connections. Wonderful. Cora, if you can now go back to our slides. I know we're making you work overtime today.
No problem. Let's see here. All right. One of these times I'll get more savvy at moving my Zoom box around, but here we go.
You're doing great. All right, so what we are going to have next is we are going to have a presentation by Mericle and Leonard Jason on the intersection of recovery homes and recovery community centers. They have a better title for it that I'll share in a moment. But before I open the floor to them, if we go to the next slide, we have two discussants with us today who are going to offer their thoughts right after the presentation to start our conversation for all of us to jump in. And certainly if you have questions and comments and thoughts throughout the presentation, please share those as well. Right after the presentation, while you're gathering your thoughts still, Kathryn and Mike are going to share their thoughts to kick us off. So we'll make sure we'll have space for them to speak within the hour. And then, of course, after one, the public recording is going to stop, but we will still be here for a half hour after that for the meeting after meeting to discuss more. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Amy and Leonard. Take your time to present. We're excited to hear what you have for us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bettina. It's just amazing to be here. I'm part of this amazing project, and it's been a while since I was a presenter. So it's wonderful to be back. So today, Dr. Jason and I will be talking about the importance of recovery housing and building bridges to enhance recovery support. So let's go to the next slide. I'll do some brief introductions about who we are. I'm Amy Mericle, a research scientist in the Alcohol Research Group at the Public Health Institute. I'm a health services researcher, but for much of my work in the past 15 years, I've been focused on recovery housing. I've conducted studies of recovery housing across the country, in Pennsylvania, Texas, and California, and I've led studies focused on recovery housing that are national in scope. I've also served on the board of directors for the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, or NAR, and currently serve on the NAR Advisory Council. So I'll be co-presenting with Dr. Leonard Jason. Dr. Jason is a professor at DePaul University, where he leads the Center for Community Research. He's a community psychologist by training, and since the early 90s, his group has been studying the effectiveness of Oxford House recovery homes using multiple methods, as well as trying to understand the dynamic processes in these houses that account for change. Dr. Jason is a former president of the Division of Community Psychology of the American Psychological Association, and he's edited over 30 books and published over 900 articles and 100 book chapters. I'm always astounded by that stat. He was incredibly helpful to me when I first started studying recovery housing, and I'm pleased that we collaborate with each other on the iStar project that's also part of the COARS network. So with those introductions, let's dive into the heart of the presentation. And we'll start off by defining recovery housing. So what is recovery housing? Well, for better or for worse, it can look like a lot of different things and can even go by a variety of different names. Some of these you've likely heard of: Oxford houses, sober living houses, recovery homes, recovery residences, and even halfway houses. So the short answer to the question is that recovery housing is a recovery support service that is residential in nature. Recovery residences offer safe and healthy community-oriented home environments where skills vital for sustaining recovery are provided. So some key characteristics of recovery housing include alcohol and drug-free living environments, peer support and accountability, opportunities for meaningful roles, and connections to others in the recovery community. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we've defined it, but what does recovery housing look like and what does it do? So I've pasted on this slide a graphic that is a little dated, but it depicts how the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, or NAR, has delineated 4 levels of care covering the entire spectrum of different types of recovery residences. The different levels of care in this graphic range from residences that are entirely peer run, level 1 residences, like Oxford houses, to those that actually provide clinical services and would be considered substance use treatment, level 4s. And those would be things like therapeutic communities, as well as everything in between. For example, like sober living houses, level 2 residences, which provide no clinical services, have a strong peer support element, but unlike Oxford houses, also incorporate a house manager to help kind of oversee the day-to-day operations. Level 3 residences stop short of providing clinical services, but they offer recovery support services. So when I show this graphic, I always note that even though these levels highlight differences, there are also elements that unite the different types of recovery residences and distinguish them from other service delivery mechanisms. So for example, people live in recovery housing. It's not just a place where people receive peer support or services. It provides individuals in recovery a home. Moreover, individuals living in recovery housing provide one another recovery support and have responsibility for maintaining the household environment as part of their recovery. In essence, what makes a recovery residence is peer support and residents taking responsibility within the household to create a community that supports a lifestyle in recovery. So let's go to the next slide. So that's what recovery housing is. Let's talk a little bit now about research on recovery housing, specifically research on whether recovery housing works, or in other words, whether there's an evidence base to support recovery housing as a recovery support service. So I've highlighted on this slide a couple of systematic literature reviews for recovery housing. One conducted by Sharon Reef and colleagues a number of years ago now. I think it was back in 2014. And another more recent review conducted by Corey Vilsaint about 10 years later, and this is in 2025. Surprisingly, despite the gap in years between these reviews, each highlights some common themes. The first common theme is that uh, the level of evidence that they kind of characterize the literature being on recovery housing, they both characterize it as moderate. So this is due to the limited number of studies, and that was definitely true in 2014, but less so now. But primarily because there have been few randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, of recovery housing. And RCTs are the gold standard for establishing effectiveness of an intervention. And unfortunately, that's still true. However, results from the work conducted thus far suggest positive substance use outcomes and improvements in functioning, particularly in the realms of employment and criminal activity. So to talk more about this research, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Dr. Leonard Jason, to talk about the research that he's conducted on Oxford houses. So Lenny, I'm passing things off to you. Let's go to the next slide.
Thank you. So I'll be talking a little bit about studies with level 1 houses, which are self-run, and what is an Oxford house. And there's over 4,000 of them in the United States. There's no professional staff. They're democratically run. They pay their own share of the bills, so they're financially self-supporting. You can stay as long as you want, and residents become active participants rather than passive recipients of services. Next slide. Over 3 decades of research, several of them longitudinal investigations with national samples. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the randomized trials, but a little bit later in this webinar, we'll be talking about some of the social network studies. Next slide. If we could mention 4 overall themes, one is higher abstinence rates for those given these particular Oxford House recovery experiences, greater employment, highly monthly income, and reduced incarceration. 2 of the randomized studies that I wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about, we had 150 people who completed substance use treatment and were assigned to either an Oxford House or usual care, and then they were followed every 6 months for 2 years. Those assigned to the Oxford House condition compared to usual aftercare had higher abstinence rates, 69% versus 35% for the controls, higher monthly income, $989 versus $440 for the controls, and lower incarceration rates, 3% versus 9% for the controls. The second randomized study, which was done about 10 years later, involved criminally justice-involved individuals with substance use disorders. They were randomized either to an Oxford House, therapeutic community, or usual aftercare. Again, followed every 6 months for 2 years. Just real quickly, some of the results at 2 years, those in the Oxford House achieved significantly higher continuous alcohol sobriety rates, and particularly in the economic benefits. If one looks at overall benefits per person, for each resident of Oxford House, there was a gain of $12,738 for those in the control condition, $3,800, and a minus $7,500 for the therapeutic communities. One interesting finding from this randomized study was that not just in terms of economic issues or substance use issues, but also in terms of something called tolerance, that we found that those who went into the Oxford House condition had significantly greater tolerance over time than the usual aftercare. I'll hand things back. Amy.
Excellent. Thank you, Lenny. That is a fantastic but brief overview of a very impressive body of work focused on Oxford houses. But what about findings from studies of other recovery housing? Well, if you include the research on therapeutic communities, or TCs, as an example of NAR Level 4 residences, the story is brighter because there's a very robust literature supporting the effectiveness of TCs. Outside of this, however, there's only one other RCT of recovery housing, and this was likely some sort of level 2 residence. But I hear that the recovery housing in this study was really kind of made up purposely for this study or created purposely for this study that was really focused on studying a contingency management intervention called reinforcement-based treatment. The literature on other types of recovery housing is mostly observational studies of sober living houses in California conducted by my colleague Doug Polson, which have followed residents entering sober living houses and track them over time to assess change in outcomes. So let's go to the next slide. We've already talked a little bit about sober living houses, but in California, sober living houses are typically abstinence-based environments that provide no formal services. There are no limits on time in the residence, but you do see that length of stay is generally dictated by one's ability to pay, because these are largely self-pay programs, but some programs do get contracts to provide services to residents participating in certain programs or initiatives for a certain amount of time. In sober living houses, residents are expected to be active participants in the residence and a recovery community inside and outside of the house. They do chores, they attend house meetings, and likely participate in mutual help groups. So what differentiates sober living houses in California from Oxford houses is that there's a house manager in these homes to assist in the management of daily operations. So as noted earlier, this is generally what would be considered a NAR Level 2 residence. So let's go to the next slide. So what has the research on sober living houses in California contributed to the evidence base on recovery housing? Well, across 4 studies spanning roughly 20 years, we've learned a lot. Granted, these were observational studies, although one did involve a randomized trial at the house level to investigate the effectiveness of a motivational interviewing case management intervention. But we still have learned a lot, and finding from these studies mirror findings that we see regarding resident outcomes in sober living or in Oxford House studies. So, for example, these studies have found improved alcohol and drug abstinence rates over time, as well as improved employment and legal system involvement. One study looked specifically at HIV/AIDS risk behaviors, and improvements were found there as well. The other thing that we've learned from these studies, these sober living house studies, is more about how recovery housing works, because these studies have also examined key mechanisms of action. For example, looking at house, neighborhood, and helping behaviors, and we'll talk more about these things next. So let's go to the next slide. So how does recovery housing work? So in this next section of the presentation, we'll review some key concepts at the heart of the recovery housing magic. This includes the social model of recovery, recovery capital, the importance of social networks and social support, as well as psychological sense of community and social identity frameworks. All of these concepts and frameworks speak to how recovery housing facilitates recovery. How it facilitates housing stability, how it facilitates skill building and increased self-efficacy, reduced exposure to substance-using peers, enhanced social support, and greater community integration. All these things that are part of the recovery housing secret sauce. So let's go to the next slide. Let's start with the concept of the social model of recovery. So this concept speaks to how recovery housing as a service delivery entity is unique in its approach and what may differentiate it from other types of services in the substance use continuum of care. As a philosophy or an approach, social model programs value things like staff with lived experience, approaching recovery holistically and in a person-driven manner, resident responsibilities within the house, particularly regarding governance and supporting fellow residents, as well as community engagement, whether that be with residents inside the house, community with a small c, or with a larger community outside the house, community with a capital C. So recognizing the importance of the social model as an organizing framework for recovery housing, NAR built in or operationalized into its recovery housing certification standards on how different elements of the social model might look in different types of residences, such that all residences, even residences that don't provide services, can create an environment that's therapeutic in and of itself. So one of my favorite catchphrases about recovery housing, and I think this is a line from one of the pioneers of sober living houses in California, is that the service is, or that the setting is the service, that the magic happens in recovery housing because the stage is set for recovery to happen. So to talk more about how things are staged in recovery housing to promote recovery, I'm going to turn things over to Lenny to talk about the importance of residence governance and democratic processes in recovery housing. So let's go to the next slide.
Thank you, Amy. I've been interested in the democratic process that occurs within recovery homes for many years. And I think we can all believe that sense of control is a driving force, particularly when rules are fairly implemented. Increased perceived control has been associated with a number of better health outcomes and psychological wellness. So shared decision, active, meaningful participation, transparent rules. Because of this, we, over the last couple of years, have been working with a new scale called the Social Service Democracy Scale to measure key aspects of decision-making. It has strong reliability and can be used to assess the degree of decision-making provided to members. Some of our early findings with this scale is that greater participation in decision-making is associated with more positive social climates, and this relationship is linked to perceptions of fair and transparent rule implementation. In other words, residents who reported greater involvement in decision-making also tended to perceive rules as being implemented more fairly and consistently, which in turn is associated with more cohesive and supportive recovery environments. These findings suggest that the enactment of government processes, particularly the quality of implementation, may be a key mechanism through which recovery home environments influence resident experiences. And actually, I'm so interested in this issue of decision-making and democracy that I just begun working on a book called In Search of Democracy, which I hope will be coming out in the fall. Back to you, Amy.
Super cool. I didn't know that, Lenny. That's amazing. So next, I want to talk about recovery capital as a mechanism of action because recovery housing is designed and staged to enhance recovery capital among its residents. So this is a concept that most folks are familiar with, and I probably don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but recovery capital speaks to the resources, internal and external, and capacities that individuals can draw upon to initiate and sustain recovery, and that more generally enable growth and human flourishing. So across various domains, you can see how recovery housing enhances recovery capital. For example, by providing safe and affordable housing, it helps residents accrue individual recovery capital. Living among others and participating in a household with others in recovery helps enhance social capital. Being a part of the residents' mutual help groups and giving back helps residents accrue community recovery capital. So to talk a little bit more about these social capital aspect of things, I'm going to turn things back to Lenny to talk about his work on social networks and social support in recovery housing.
Our group in Chicago spent about 15 years just focusing on, does it work? What's the outcomes? And we got some pretty positive outcomes as well as from other investigators. who found this that Amy reported on. The second set of questions we've had is, why does it work? You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the reason what we focused on, one of our earliest findings from our research was that individuals who remained in an Oxford house for at least 6 months had substantially better recovery outcomes several years later. We then asked a simple question: what best predicts remaining in the house for 6 months? The answer was remarkably straightforward: having a friend in the house. Social connections mattered. This finding led us about a dozen years ago to collaborate with John Light at Oregon Research Institute, conduct social network analyses using RCNA. This is a methodology that allows us to distinguish social influence from social selection. That is, whether people become more similar because they influence one another or because they choose to associate with people who are already similar. 3 major findings have emerged in this work. First, residents who develop relationships with house members who are further along in their recovery showed greater improvements in their own recovery over time. Second, residents who sought advice from peers with stronger recovery also experienced better recovery outcomes. Third, maintaining strong relationship with family members outside the house was generally associated with improved recovery. More recent work by my graduate student, Alexander Skorny, adds an important qualification. External social ties are not uniformly beneficial. When family relationships are characterized by high levels of conflict or ongoing substance use, these outside connections can actually undermine recovery. In other words, it's not simply the presence of social ties that matters, but the quality and recovery orientation of those relationships. Amy?
Thank you. So we've talked about the importance of the recovery housing environment and social interactions with residents. I'm going to switch gears a little bit now to talk about some intrapersonal aspects of recovery housing that help contribute to positive outcomes. So let's first start with the concept of psychological sense of community. So this is a term introduced by psychologist Seymour Saracen actually in the 1970s, which speaks to an individual's perception of belonging, mattering, and mutual interdependence within a group, and how these connections help buffer against mental health or mental and emotional distress and provide a foundation for personal well-being. And it's easy to see how all the social network and social support aspects of recovery housing that Lenny just talked about contribute to this sense of belonging or this psychological sense of community. So the other thing that social connections and sense of community can facilitate is identity transformation. And the social identity model of recovery, as explained by David Best and colleagues in a paper on the topic, explains how individuals who may see themselves when they're in the active stages of their addiction as addicts or an alcoholic may come to start seeing themselves as persons in recovery, and how this process is socially mediated and reinforced through group norms, values, and beliefs. So Dr. Best and colleagues talked about this in the context of mutual help groups, but I think that's easily transferable to other sorts of recovery communities, such as those created in recovery housing. So residents in the house reinforce house rules and norms supporting recovery, which in turn help residents transition to how they think of themselves as members in the recovery housing environment, and ultimately redefine themselves as persons in recovery. So I've heard from a number of my colleagues in long-term recovery, many of whom have spent time in recovery housing, and how they talk about recovery housing and their experience in recovery housing as being transformational. So my guess is that they would point to a number of different things explaining why and how this was so transformational. But I do wonder if that is part of that is because of the internal identity shift that may have taken place as being part of a recovery community. So let's go to the next slide. And this part of the presentation, we want to talk a little bit more about how recovery housing fits into the larger substance use continuum of care, and can be used with other services, whether that be treatment, mutual help groups, or other recovery support services like RCCs. So I pasted in a graphic from a manuscript that aimed to review the case for and support for recovery support services. Even though this was in furtherance of work that was being proposed to be conducted in England, I think that a lot of the literature that they drew upon was from the U.S. and kind of spoke to developing a recovery-oriented system of care, which is definitely something that we have here in the U.S. So this graphic tries to impart the sequencing of various recovery support services and where they may have the most impact. But the authors note that some services may be stage specific, and that others may not, and that each individual's recovery journey is different, and that it's rare that a recovery process or the recovery process is linear. But in this graphic, they kind of place recovery housing following the treatment and the early stages of recovery support. And while I don't disagree that recovery housing is often used as folks are transitioning from inpatient residential treatment into aftercare, I would contend that there are many more uses for recovery housing both before and during treatment. And even beyond traditional aftercare or recovery support stages. Because recovery residences often host alumni groups or events for folks who've moved out of the house, or offer folks who want to give back opportunities to serve as a house manager or other leadership roles in the house to further support and reinforce their recovery gains. Let's go to the next slide. And I'll talk more about how recovery housing and treatment intersect. So as you may recall, most recovery residences don't provide treatment or clinical services to residents. Instead, recovery housing is often used by folks who are coming from inpatient or residential care, generally because they might not have a safe or stable home to return to after they're coming out of treatment. So these types of residences may be connected either formally or informally with specific treatment programs. And my colleague Doug Polson refers to these types of residences as step-down houses. And I think that he would point to a program that he studied in Northern California where folks would transition pretty much immediately from inpatient treatment to the program's recovery housing. And he would contrast this kind of recovery housing, these step-down houses, with what he would call freestanding houses that were not part of a larger treatment program and might accept residents at various stages in their recovery journey. Granted, even folks coming into these freestanding houses might be coming from treatment, but they didn't have to be. They could be, not even receiving treatment. They could be in outpatient care. They could be at any stage. And I think this, thinking about how recovery housing can support folks who are in outpatient care is a really understudied area. And we should really think more about how that recovery housing can be used in this way. The reason I think that's important is because using recovery housing while people are in inpatient care or linking to inpatient care is important in terms of potentially mitigating readmission to higher levels of care, to residential treatment, inpatient care, or folks are involved in the criminal legal system, incarceration. So I've listed on this slide some work that I did collaborating with a treatment provider that had recovery housing available to individuals attending their outpatient program. So not only did I talk to folks about why they used recovery housing while they were attending this outpatient care, but I also looked at administrative data for folks who entered recovery housing while they were in treatment, and those who didn't during the same 2-year period. So I could look at differences between those who did and didn't enter recovery housing. And what we found that was that differences between those who did and didn't use recovery housing generally reflected a greater likelihood of those with more complex service needs living in recovery housing during their outpatient treatment. We also found that despite these differences in needs, living in recovery housing was associated with greater likelihood of satisfactory discharge and greater outpatient treatment retention, basically longer lengths of stay in outpatient treatment. And both of these things are desirable outcomes in the context of outpatient treatment. So let's go to the next slide and have Lenny talk about some other ways recovery housing can be used.
Great. Thank you, Amy. So mutual help, which we think of as self-help groups, can combine with the recovery housing that we've been talking about into something that's even more powerful. The two programs offer adults in recovery settings the opportunity to develop a strong sense of community with similar others who share common abstinence goals. And receiving support for abstinence, guidance, and information from others committed to maintaining long-term recovery may help avoid relapse. One study that was done by our group examined the effects of AA and Oxford House on abstinence over a 24-month period. What we found was that individuals with 12-step involvement, the addition of Oxford House significantly increased the odds of abstinence. So the self-help plus Oxford House had 88% abstinence at 2 years versus without just the Oxford House was 53%. The results suggested that the joint effectiveness of these mutual help programs promotes very high levels of abstinence. So a combination of these two mutual help programs might have produced the best outcomes for residents because of the joint emphasis on positive social support, strict rules, abstinence living, and self-direction. I'll turn things back to Amy.
Thank you. So we've talked about recovery housing and treatment and recovery housing and mutual help groups. What about other recovery support services, namely recovery community centers? Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of research in this area, but I have pasted into the slide a study that looked at recovery housing that added recovery support services to their program and compared those who received those services to those who didn't. And they found that those who received the enhanced support had improved retention rates in recovery housing and growth in recovery capital after living in the residence for 6 to 9 months. So that is encouraging. But we need more of this kind of research. And this gap is heartbreaking because it makes perfect sense to combine these types of services. And again, while some recovery residences might provide these services, like level 3 residences, most recovery residences don't provide any services, even recovery support services. And RCCs would be a perfect complement to recovery housing for a whole host of reasons, but mostly because RCCs do provide a range of services, and what they don't provide, they can link their members to. Also of note is that RCCs don't provide housing. But if connected with a network of recovery residences, they could strengthen the density of support offerings to their members. And together, this could create a stronger recovery community presence or recovery presence in the community or ecosystem benefiting all members of the wider community in which these services are located. And these spillover effects or second order change would also be worthy of additional study. So let's go to the next slide and try and wrap up so we can give some time to other folks.
So, in summary, recovery housing is an evidence-based approach that consistently improves long-term recovery outcomes for individuals with substance use disorders. Its effectiveness rests on the social model of recovery, where democratic participation, mutual responsibility, peer support, and shared governance actively engage residents in their own recovery and the functioning of the community. These experiences build recovery capital by strengthening personal, social, and community resources that support sustained recovery. The social processes within recovery housing drive many of its positive outcomes. Residents develop supportive relationships, increase accountability, assume meaningful roles, and learn leadership and problem-solving skills through everyday participation in the community. Integrating recovery housing with recovery community centers has the potential to further enhance outcomes. Recovery housing provides a stable, recovery-oriented living environment, while RCCs expand access to peer support, community engagement, education, employment resources, and long-term recovery supports. Together, they can create a more comprehensive and sustainable recovery ecosystem.
Yeah, so in terms of where to go next, I hope that people are appreciating that we've done a lot of work, but there's still a lot of work that can be done. And I hope that we've inspired folks to roll up their sleeves. And we can talk more about that. I'm sure that that other folks will have questions about future studies. But let's go to the next slide, because I do want to thank my iStar team, who is focused on supporting research and advancing the recovery science evidence base. And if we go to the next slide, the iStar project does a lot of programming to support the infrastructure for recovery housing. One of those things is a seminar very similar to this, a webinar that's done every third Tuesday of the month. And we'll have one in July, just a shameless plug here that's on the topic of cannabis use among sober living house residents. It will be presented by Mina Subrabin. But there are lots of resources on the iStar website, so please feel free to go check that out. If we go to the next slide, hopefully we'll have some time for questions. Folks can stay after this presentation and can hear from Lenny and myself, but if not, please feel free to email us with your questions. And that's it for us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy and Lenny. There was so much great food for thought in here. I'll turn it over to Kathryn and then Mike for their comments and start us on discussion. And I also, right after that, will turn it over to Joe Powell, who is now with us as well. So Kathryn, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Drs. Jason and Mericle, for your incredibly informative presentation. So when I think about the intersection of recovery housing and recovery community centers, the first thing that comes to mind is the slide that discussed the key concepts of recovery housing and what that looks like in terms of social support and greater community integration. Given the services and support that recovery community centers provide, I think there's a real opportunity, as Amy and Lenny said, for these service models to work together to really better support people in recovery and complement each other's strengths. So I'd like to share an example from my own work that demonstrates how recovery housing and recovery community centers work together to provide comprehensive support. So my colleague, Mike Wilkerson, and I lead a study in Texas called Project Homes, where we've partnered with community partners across the state to open and evaluate 15 NAR level 2 and 3 recovery residences for people taking medications for opioid use disorder. And based on baseline survey data from over 700 residents who have entered the homes, we're showing that 75% of those residents have accessed a recovery community center within 3 months of moving into the home. Granted, we do launch the baseline survey between 7 and 14 days of them moving. And so a lot of residents are engaging with recovery community centers. One of the recovery organizations that we've partnered with operates several recovery homes and a recovery community center. And what we've seen with this partnership is every resident that moves into a recovery home is assigned a recovery coach that they meet with. The recovery coach is employed by the recovery community center. They meet with them regularly at the community center to work on their goals. And so that's a natural collaboration and support that is offered through the recovery center. People who are accessing services at the recovery center are often connected into recovery housing if they're interested. So it serves as a really great referral source and point of entry, if you will. The Recovery Community Center is really a central gathering spot we've seen in our visits for all of the residents across the homes, as well as members outside of the recovery homes who are part of the larger recovery community to come together, participate in events. They also host all of their mutual aid meetings there. So we see residents from across the home attend meetings at the Recovery Community Center and also access services. And because of this, the Recovery Community Center we've seen really helps to expand the social network and social support of the recovery homes beyond, I guess, the walls of the homes itself, right? And I think that's really, really important, especially when a resident moves out of the home, that they have that extended support. And then another example from our project is we've partnered with the Recovery Community Center to provide recovery coaching services to recovery home residences. And it's separate organizations, recovery homes and the Recovery Community Center. And so what we've seen is the peer support specialists from the Recovery Community Center really serves as the bridge because they're the ones meeting with recovery home residents. So they're serving as that bridge to connect residents back to the larger Recovery Community Center. And so these are just two examples that we've seen in our own work on how recovery community centers and recovery homes can work together to support people in recovery. And I'm really interested in, what other types of collaborations are happening between recovery housing and recovery community centers in other communities. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Mike and see if he has some thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Kathryn. So I agree with everything Kathryn said. And I have questions around the two different models, right? So the first example Kathryn gave, that organization is moving towards, they have aspirational goals towards becoming a recovery village, right? And with that, the RCC and the recovery homes, they have a shared identity, right? And they're working together, it would seem, to build a common understanding of recovery among their residents, and the programming complements itself, right? Contrast that with where we have two separate organizations who, broadly speaking, have the same philosophy and the same goal, but they're two separate organizations, and there are differences, and that does create dissonance. And some of the places, not necessarily the example that you're thinking of, Kathryn, but we can think of other places, right? Where that dissonance really grows is now when we start overlaying mood on top of it. And we're fighting against mood stigma. And so now you have an environment, perhaps, in which you have an RCC that supports recovery, perhaps is slightly less supportive of mood and or supports mood in a limited way. And you have a recovery home that's trying to become mood supportive, and they want to access those services. And so now you have, thank you, Bettina. And so now you have two folks going on the same pathway, but with a little bit of dissonance in between, right? And so how do we create a environment in the community at large where there's more alignment? Right? So what do we do in terms of, how can we leverage funding models or policies or just community engaged interventions to create more alignment and get everyone on the same page? I think there's questions and work to be done in that area.
I love those thoughts. Joe, might you be able to jump in? You've worked with so many organizations in the recovery space. Joe Powell, first of all, if you want to take a chance to say hello to everybody, and then add your thoughts.
All right. My name is Joe Powell, and I'm a young man in long-term recovery. And it's only because of recovery I'm able to be the president and CEO of APA, the Association of Persons Affected by Addiction, now in Texas, in Dallas area for 26 years now. And a lot of movement, especially I love it when we're talking about not only RCOs, recovery community organizations, but recovery community centers and how they are spreading. And looks like right here, we're looking at more innovative points of contagion. As Bill White say, you know what I mean, that recovery is contagious. Give it to somebody, right? And so what is those recovery houses? They spreading recovery. Our purpose is only to spread recovery. For me, of course, I am in the African American community. And so even the cultural considerations when we're talking about recovery as an organization, as a recovery community center, two centers on Martin Luther King, one on Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and one is on Martin Luther King. But I have to, again, always be culturally considerate, culturally congruent to the communities that we serve. So no matter where we at across the country, right, do we really honor that right there? So I think even with some of the challenges with medications assisted, well, we say also medications for addiction treatment. I have to also educate people on that too, that what does MAT mean? Because I love that stigma, getting rid of that stigma as far as just medication assisted, right? Another drug for another drug, but any medication. If you take medications for mental health, physical health, you know what I mean? Also any kind of an illness, and also as far as for addiction treatment. So I think that's an opportunity for even the recovery housing to really to know that, yeah, somebody's taking medication, well, no matter if you, whatever you're taking medications for, but you need to know what MAT really stands for, right? So I think for us, it's also MARS. So MARS is medication assisted recovery specialists or recovery support specialists. We're trained, right, by, of course, Walter Genta out of New York, of course, and opiates was my drug of choice, you know, for years. But also, again, so it is very important that we know that medications for recovery, assisted recovery specialists are out there. That actually people with lived experience that are also certified by the state. The other thing is recovery housing is just so huge, and I really love the connection. I'm trying to get more of recovery housing in the Black community because, again, we are not really, it's not coming to us. But we have done so much with housing, including save hospitals. When you're talking about wherever people are, right? When you're talking about, we would had recovery specialists in the hospital, and straight out of the hospital, they would come to APA, to our organization, and we had recovery housing back then. This was before COVID, and so we had a huge, of course, what was it, 12? It was only 12 beds. But in that housing right there, right, they was able to come to the Recovery Community Center, right? And we ended up saving the hospital $4 million. Meadows Foundation did a analysis on that right there to show how APA saved the hospital from avoiding beds from people once they're connected to a recovery specialist, right, and then a recovery community center, right, that they did not return immediately. You know, they so used to, of course, people just returning right to the hospital, and they wasn't doing that. So the recovery center and, of course, the recovery housing play a big role as far as how do they connect to even a bigger movement. The last thing I want to say is that with recovery housing also connecting to a recovery community center and a recovery community organization is that they'll learn about the bigger recovery movement in the United States or globally. A lot of people just we don't want them to be spoiled. Just I'm just in this recovery house, right? Of course, we want it to be global. We want them to know that hey, you're part of something way bigger than just you know what I mean, the one house on this corner or on this block. Yeah, we got a swimming pool and all that in North Dallas, but you know what I mean. This is part of a movement. You know, the slides that I was going to show earlier was even how that with APA and our recovery center, how we also bring not only conferences to the recovery community center, you know, Faces and Voices of Recovery. I hold Bill White, all of us, we did a big executive director leadership academy at the recovery community center, right? And so I got a picture of all of them, Pat Taylor, Kathy, McCarthy, all of us there at the center. You know what I mean? So we have events every day, groups all day, right? But it's very important that how we connect to and have those relationships with the community as far as with housing and the Recovery Community Center. Thank you. I hope I was
Fantastic.
under 2 minutes.
Well, Joe, and if you send us the slides, we'll put them on the website so folks can still look at the details and explore all the content that you highlighted here today. That is fantastic.